Here's how you can make a Waybar config that looks exactly like this. So as you can see over here, I have this little, separator icon, which if I hover over it, it gives me access to two other icons. So it helps to keep the bar a bit more minimal and really shoves away the clutter into a drawer, because that's literally what this is. This is a drawer. It's a group functioning as a drawer, right? If I show you what the notifications look like, this is what that is. That's separate, by the way. That's an Overwatch panel I've created, like Control Center, using Sway NC. And then this is Power Profiles daemon. After that, this is the Workspaces module that we have. And then we have Volume, which allows you to adjust like this. Then the network. And then we also have the battery, right? Like so. And this is what the rest of the workspace switching looks like. So what I'll do is I'll first open, of course, config Waybar inside of VS Code. And I have config.jsonc and style.css opened up. So first, what you want to do is just go over to config Waybar. And of course, you have to make that directory. And once you do that, you can just nvim or use your text editor of choice and then create a config.jsonc file. Now, basically, JSON is a file format that allows you to create configurations like these. So it doesn't necessarily have to be configurations for Waybar. It can also be for your favorite program, like let's say VS Codium, for example. This is the text editor that I'm using. So VS Codium also uses JSON-C as its configuration format, right? But basically, that's what that is. And the C in JSON-C just stands for comments. So you actually have the ability to write comments in here. So you want to do that. You want to create that file. So you can just use touch to create that file. Touch config.jsonc. And then you also want to touch a file called style.css. So what touch does is just basically just creates the files, creates empty files in this case. Okay. And style.css, of course, CSS stands for cascading style sheets. This is what you use in order to style the different components of the bar. So let's say I want to give the clock a bigger font size. I want to change the font of the clock itself. I want to give this a cool gradient. I want to make this a bit bigger, smaller. All of that is controlled by style.css, right? So you create these two files. And once you do that, you open it inside your favorite text editor. Here I'm using VS Codium because it's much easier to see. And you can also have, really cool syntax highlighting and all the other fun stuff that VS Codium offers you. Okay, so let's get started. I'll just go over each of these settings that I have over here. I'll explain what each of them does. Okay, and you can just go ahead and implement the same inside of your own config. Okay, so you can either just take it from here, implement it into your own config, or you can take inspiration and create something of your own, which, to be honest, is the best route when it comes to creating rices and whatnot, because the best thing you can do is just take inspiration and create your own thing, because, it just is really good. You get to make your own thing and have fun while doing it. Okay, so first thing we have here is layer top, right? Now, what is this layer thing? Layer basically determines which layer this bar is going to be on. So you have a couple of different options for layer. You have top and bottom, right? You can basically dictate whether this behaves like an overlay, so it displays on top of everything. Okay, so let's say I make this window floating. Okay, this is going to behave like an overlay. So any window that I have is actually behind it. So if I change it to bottom, however, and then I reload, what's going to happen is it becomes a kind of thing that blends in with the background. So as you can see over here, it just becomes like a widget that's kind of stuck to your wallpaper of sorts. So if you have any windows, this is not going to overlap those windows. So you can choose whichever one you want. I personally prefer it to be top so that, it's acting as an overlay, but it's your choice. You can pick whichever one you want. And of course, the position, this one's pretty obvious, right? This is the position. I have chosen it to be left. It can also be right, okay? Because this is a vertical bar, the only positions that are going to work are left and right. If I attempted to make this top, very weird stuff would happen because, one, the sliders and whatnot are just meant to be working vertically. And secondly, the workspace switcher too. This doesn't just adapt if you change the position. So here you basically choose the position of your bar and get it to be whichever side you want it to be. Okay. Okay. Then once you do that, you're going to have to choose what modules you want on the left side of your bar, center, and right. Now, usually this would be left, right, and center on a horizontal bar, but because we're on a vertical bar over here, this just means top, center, and bottom, right? Top, middle, bottom. Still the same principle applies. Now, inside here, we have clock, pretty simple. You just choose whichever modules you want. So you can just go over to GitHub www.com/Alexei's Waybar wiki. Okay, and then you'll have a section which says modules over here. And then this has plenty of modules. Of course, you can choose whichever modules you want, paste them in over here, and have fun with it. You can have disk usage, you can have RAM usage, you can have what else? CPU usage, you can have all sorts of metrics going on over here. So you can keep an eye on whatever you need to keep an eye on, basically. You can also have cryptocurrency indicators over here to see whether price of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, whichever crypto you're into is going up or not. Okay, you can have all sorts of stuff from this module section. So you pick whichever ones you want and then you put them in over here. Okay. Inside modules left, for example, I have clock and group/misc. Now, what is this? Well, let's see here. So group/misc, this is the module. So in this module, which is a group basically allows us to hide certain modules, okay, until like this main group thing, representation of the group, is hovered over or clicked on. So in this case, the first module inside of this group, which I call misc, okay, miscellaneous, the first module in here is going to be separator. So that's the module that's going to be showing. If I change this, for example, to something like custom notification, that's actually going to be the first module that shows. And inside, when I hover over this, then the separator shows, and then I see this, but that's not quite of much use. So this is the configuration that I have over here. So the separator looks really cool, separating the clock from the rest of the bar, while also giving me functionality to hover over it to see whatever modules that I have to, right? Pretty cool idea. You can implement the same. Now, that's that. Let's go through all these settings so you can understand what they are. So here we have orientation, which is inherit. Now you can have either inherit, vertical, horizontal, or orthogonal, I'm pretty sure. Orthogonal just means 90 degrees. That's basically going to open it out this way. Best way is for me to show you. So orthogonal would mean 90 degrees. So as you can see here, this is what that does. Okay, so if you don't want that, if you're using a vertical bar like I am, you can either use inherit or vertical, which gives you this cool effect over here. Okay, then inside drawer. So drawer is this part that you see over here. First, we are basically giving this an animation, but it's not quite an animation, like in quotes, right? It's not quite an animation. It's a transition, which basically gives a transition to what these two modules are, right? The appearance of these two modules. Okay, then children class. Children class is going to dictate what class each of these modules, each of these little icons, right? Each of these modules has. So if I wanted to target both of these modules at the exact same time, I would do it with this class, misc modules, which is exactly what I'm doing over here. So misc modules dot misc modules, and then the font size is 15 pixels. That's what is happening when I use this class, okay? And then of course, we are defining the actual modules that are inside of this group itself, which are going to be the separator, so that I can hover on top and see my stuff. Then custom notification, because I want to see this panel over here. And then Power Profiles daemon, because I want to be able to click on it and then change whatever I have to when it comes to the performance, right? That's that. Then Hyprland Workspaces. This one's pretty simple. In terms of the actual configuration itself, we don't have much to do really. This Hyprland Workspaces, everything is the exact same. So you can go over to the wiki. Okay, we can just search up Hyprland. You can go here and they have an example module given over there. You can just copy this example module. Okay, window or workspaces really. Workspaces, so you can copy this and then you can paste it over here, which basically gives you the same workspace effect on Hyprland, right? It doesn't give you the same effect, but it gives you the same basic structure that you can work off of. So the format is basically just the ID of the workspace. So this format in any Waybar module is going to dictate what exactly you're going to see here. So right now I've hidden the text color by just making it transparent, which is why you don't see the number on the workspace. But apart from that, you should be seeing the ID of the workspace. And if you click that, if you click on any of these modules, it's going to activate. Okay, it's going to go to that specific workspace. You scroll up, it's going to move to the next workspace, scroll down, go to the previous, however that works. And then cursor pointer. Now this cursor is actually going to remain as a pointer. If I remove this, what happens is the cursor goes to being this sort of little clicky thing. So if you don't want that, if you want the cursor to just be uniform, because as you can see, it's kind of causing a bit of weird issue, right? So even though I haven't hovered over any of these things, I still see this button. So it's kind of annoying. So what I personally did is just I turned it off with cursor pointer. So the cursor remains the same no matter where I go on this module. Okay, so that's it for the workspaces. Next, we have group/volume. Again, here we're using the group setting in order to make sure that we get this drawer-like facility. So this is what allows us to adjust the volume. And yes, this actually works. Now I'd show you by adjusting the volume, but as you can see, this corresponds, right? So I can drag this back even in this Overwatch panel, and it's going to correspond with volume over here. How do you make this work? Well, first of all, we're going to have to define the group itself. Okay, so in the group, we're going to have orientation is vertical because we want it to be a vertical drawer. Then inside the drawer, we're going to define the transition duration, and then we're going to enable this option. Transition top to bottom equals like colon is true. So what you want to happen is basically for the transition to occur from the top to the bottom. So as I hover over here, what it's going to do is animate this sort of transition and give me this effect. Sometimes what happens is if you don't have this effect, you can see that it ends up, appearing horizontally to this module, which is not what you want. So in order to really control it and make sure it doesn't happen, we are using transition top to bottom, right? And then inside of this group, we have pulse audio, and then we have pulse audio/slider. So pulse audio is again pretty simple. You can just copy the module over from the wiki directly. You can just copy from here. There should be pulse audio on the right side. Okay, you can just copy that and then paste it into here. What we actually want to know about is pulse audio/slider. This slider too is pretty much exactly copy paste from the wiki. You can just take that, put it inside your config. The minimum volume you can adjust is going to be 0, the maximum is going to be 100, and the orientation is going to be vertical as usual. Awesome. We just put that into a group, and then whenever we hover over one of the icons in the group, we see the rest of the elements of that group. Pretty amazing. And of course, if we actually click on this button itself, it's going to pull up power control, pulse audio volume control, so that we can control our volume. Awesome. Next, we have network. So this is basically just an icon, which I still haven't set up on-click events for this icon just yet, which basically means if you click on this icon, it should be able to open up a network manager GUI or something like that, which allows you to control the network. That is yet to be done, but I can just set that up with like one command. And then for the battery, if you just hover over it, it shows you the battery percentage. Okay, that is pretty much it for the modules. The rest over here is basically just remnants from my previous config, like weather, for example, like weather and launcher and media, all of this. You don't really need it because I haven't used it over here. And tray. Tray too is pretty simple. You can copy and paste it from the wiki. So if I show you where tray is, okay, I can just click on tray and then copy and paste it. So what that is going to do is basically give you tray functionality. So if you have an app open, like let's say Telegram, that is actually just going to stay in the background until you fully close the thing, or Teams or Zoom or Spotify, any app that just gets minimized to the background, hell, even Proton VPN, right? Any app that gets minimized to the background is going to show up in the tray, even Discord. So that basically allows you to control apps from there. Now, I personally don't have any apps that are going to reside in the tray, so even if I did remove this module, it wouldn't have an effect. But if you do want to keep that, you can go ahead and do so. That is basically going to cover config.jsonc. Now inside MISC, let's see if I covered all the modules here. Custom notification. So if you're using Sway and C, like I am, oh, and by the way, if you want to know how to make an Overwatch panel like this, along with Waybar configs that look as good as this one, along with making custom themes which is like this, and a hell of a lot more, go ahead and click the first link in the description. I show you exactly how to do this. I show you how to set everything up from scratch. I basically create the entire thing, create the bar config, create the custom theme switcher, and the logout menu, basically everything from scratch right with you, so that you don't have to go around looking for 50 different YouTube tutorials on your own. So if you want to know how to make something like this, just go ahead and click the first link in the description. I can guarantee you this. If you actually click that link in the description, your setup is not going to be the same. I can guarantee that it will be faster and better looking than it is right now. So go ahead, click the first link in the description and check it out. Okay. Now, for this custom notification module, what you actually want to do is just head on over to Sway and See GitHub. Okay, and now over there, you're going to find that there is a little snippet for us to copy and paste. So if we just click over here, there is a snippet that we can copy and paste so that we can get notifications up and running. So if we look for Waybar example, so this is where I got the custom notification thing from. So I can just copy this, right click copy, head on over to the config, and then just paste it like you saw. And the separator module too, there's nothing much going on over here. It's just a little dash, and there's not going to be any tooltip. So when I stay hovering on it, it doesn't say that it's a little separator, right? And for Power Profiles daemon, that's also straight copied and pasted from the wiki. Now, one thing that you'll notice over here is that there's no magic gizmos, okay, or really complicated stuff that you have to use in cases of, you know, the big desktop shells like AGS or Quickshell or Fabric, Ignis, any of those ones, right? You don't have to do any of that stuff at all. Honestly, you don't even need the colors or the scripts folder over here at all. This config that I have right now is even more minimal than the one that I had previously, because that was fetching the weather and then Pacman updates and whatnot. Now this is even more minimal, arguably. So I don't even need these two folders. I could just get rid of that and then make my Waybar config work with just two files. Think about how powerful that is. You don't have to actually write any code. You're not writing QML, you're not writing TypeScript, you're not writing JavaScript, you're not writing Python, none of those languages. Okay, all you're writing is just a little bit of JSON and then some CSS. If you've done web development, this is going to pretty much be a cakewalk. Even if you haven't done web development, this is still a cakewalk, because you can still go online and ask whatever search engine that you have to in order to get your answers, right? With coding, it's not as simple as that. So that's another benefit or bonus to doing things this way. You don't have to deal with any of the complexity that you get. Okay? Now for style.css. Now what I'm doing here, first of all, is just importing colors/colors.css. So here, this is basically importing Tokyo Night.css, which is going to have all of these colors. Now this folder is actually what makes the custom theme switcher magic come alive. So thanks to this folder, we have the custom theme switcher. Okay, now that's that line. Now here in the universal selector, so this asterisk, no matter where you come across it, whether you come across it in your terminal or you come across it in any other context, basically, this stands for a wildcard, basically. It's a universal selector. So this asterisk selects every single element that you can possibly select inside of the bar itself. And what it's doing here, first we're going to remove the border, and we're going to add a border radius of 0 pixels to it. Okay, so we basically want to completely remove the border radius and make sure that this bar is flush against the screen. So that's what allows us to get this really cool sidebar dock setup, right? And then we're choosing our font family. So I have chosen SF Pro Display. You can choose whichever font you want, and you can choose something like Rubik or Manrope. Any of these fonts you can get from Google Fonts. If you just go to fonts.google.com, should be able to find pretty good fonts over here. Like Inter is a really good one. And then after Inter, you have Roboto, which is like the standard web font. And then after that, you have Manrope, Inter, Manrope, and then you have Work, Sans. Yeah, these are really good fonts that you can just pick and use for your UI. So you can just pick a font, choose whichever one you want, like install it, follow the process for installation in your specific distro. Like for Arch Linux, how you install a font is actually pretty simple. So you click on a font, right? Click on Get Font, download all, and then you're going to download the font over here. You're going to save it into the downloads folder. Once you do that, you go into the downloads folder, and then you basically extract the font file. So that's going to, let's say, Space Grotesque. This is a font that I downloaded earlier. Once you extract that, you're going to get a zip file, or rather, you're going to get a TTF file. So if I just ls everything ending in .ttf, okay, and again, as you can see here, this is a wildcard, as I showed you in this example. So it's basically saying, select everything that ends with, or list everything that ends with the .ttf extension. And that displays this Space Grotesque TTF. Okay, so if you're on Arch, how you want to install this font is basically git one of these fonts, whether it's a variable weight font or you actually have a list of different fonts like italic, bold, semi-italic, whatever other font weights that you have, right? You want to put them all into a folder first. And then what you want to do is create a folder inside. Okay, so inside user, local, share, fonts, TTF, and then the font name itself. So space grotesque. Let's say if I were creating for this font, space grotesque, right? Now inside of there, I just create this folder, and then once I create the folder, and by the way, if you're wondering what this red arrow is, so I just exit out of executing a command by pressing Control C, and that's what gives you the red arrow. It gives you an exit code of 127, which is why it gives you this, red thing, but it's fine, right? So you're going to make this directory, and then you're just going to move the font file over to that directory. So sudo mv space grotesque, you move it to this directory. Once you do that, you just have to run fc cache -fv. F stands for force, V stands for verbose. Once you do that, you should be able to open up a tool like nwg look and select the font that you want. So space grotesque should be a font that I can select over here, right? Like so. You can follow that same process if you run Arch for any font that you want to download, and that should be it. Okay. Now, there's a reason why I'm using two fonts. So the main font that I'm using is going to be a sans serif font, which is going to be SF Pro Display. Second font, as a fallback font, I'm using a monospaced font. And the magic about this font is because it's a nerd font, it also allows me to use these icons. Because if I did not have this font over here, what would happen is that the spacing gets really weird and then some icons don't display properly. As you can see, the spacing is really off. And once you see it, it's like you cannot unsee it. So in order to keep your sanity and make sure that you still stay alive and want to keep using your computer, we use this nerd font after SF Pro Display, which is going to be your sans serif font. Okay, now for the padding and margin, we want to just reset everything and make sure that it's all flush, that there's no padding or margin magic going on that we are not aware of. So we just remove the padding and margin for every single element before we add in custom padding and margin ourselves. And then the minimum width, this is what I use in order to keep the width of the bar as close to the screen's edge as possible without having to resort to other methods. And it works very well. So we have that. And then we have window Waybar over here. Background color, we're just choosing the background color of the window to be a BG0 with a 0.8. Now, the way you actually get blur on Waybar to work is, of course, you change the opacity of the window itself, because the way Hyprland deals with blur is it only blurs surfaces that are translucent or slightly translucent. So they don't have to be fully transparent in order for the blur to occur, because then there will be no blur. There is no color to blur after all, right? What you want is some slight transparency so you can actually see through the window, but then it's not completely see-through. So any sort of opacity between 100% or 90% to 20% should work, right? So here I have chosen 80% opacity, which gives you this effect. This is actually most visible if I show you with Kanagawa. So as you can see, it's not fully opaque. You can still see the wallpaper behind it. And that's the principle. So basically just apply a blur to the bar. And if blur doesn't work by default, what you want to do is just edit your window rules to then allow the blur to work. So config hyper modules, let's see, window rules.conf right here. So if I show you for Waybar, I've added a couple of rules. So first, it's just going to blur Waybar. Secondly, it's going to ignore zero opacity, as I mentioned. Ignore zero basically means do not blur a surface which has 100% opacity or is 100% opaque. And then ignore alpha, you choose like what alpha value to ignore. So if it's just 0.9, like let's say this is like 90% opacity, any window, it's not going to blur that window basically. And choose these three settings inside your window rules.conf file. What's going to happen is that you're going to be able to blur Waybar. Pretty sweet. Okay. Then what we're doing is just trying to add a box shadow. Now, this method is not quite as simple as it seems because it's really stubborn with the way it applies certain properties, so it doesn't matter whether I have the box shadow right now or not. Just get rid of that. Then for tooltip, if you're not going to be using tooltips, you don't have to worry about this, but tooltip is what you see when you hover over any thing like this. So if you hover over any one of these modules, so you see that connected to Atlantis message over there, that is a tooltip. You can choose the background to be transparent and then add in a border, add in a radius. And then for the label itself, I choose the color to be the foreground so that it's not, eye-searingly white, if you will. Okay, then for the workspaces, now this is where all the magic happens. Honestly, even if you threw out the entirety of the rest of the bar, like if you threw out this module and then this, everything, if you just had this workspaces module, this entire bar would be complete. This bar needs nothing else. That's how powerful it is. Think about it. If you could just have like one single module over here and one style.css file, and then be golden, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? Well, this is what that allows you to do. The workspaces. So inside the workspaces, we have set the minimum width to be 0 so that, again, no other spooky, funky stuff is happening without us knowing. So what setting the min width to 0 allows us to do is it basically allows us to control the actual width of this bar, this pill, properly, using our own methods without having to mess around with margin and padding and then having it be inconsistent as you switch between different workspaces. Because one thing that happens is that if you don't use min width in certain places, what I've shown you, what's going to happen is the bar is going to start jumping around. It it just has a lot of energy at times. So what happens is that the bar literally starts expanding and then contracting a little bit, expanding, contracting. It does that again and again as you switch between different workspaces, because some parts of this module get a little bit more space as you switch between different workspaces. So you don't want that to happen, which is why you're using min width as 0. Okay, and then you have margin to be 20 pixels. Of course, you want 20 pixels of margin from the top, right, bottom, and the left, which is why you're using that over here. And then transition, you want every single little transition between one state and the other to be animated or to have a transition, which is why you're going to use all over here. You're going to make the transition last for 0.3 seconds, and then you're going to use the cubic, or rather the Bezier curve, ease in out. Now, what is a Bezier curve? Well, I'm glad you asked, because a Bezier curve is kind of like a set of mathematical instructions that basically dictates how a curve should look. You don't have to concern yourself with it too much. What it is basically a way of defining how a certain animation is supposed to look or behave. So if I go to easings.net, I can show you a bunch of different Bezier curves over here, right? So here they say it's an easing function. I can show you this one, ease and out quint, for example. This is the cubic Bezier that's being used. So I can just copy this and paste it into your Hyprland config, for example, if you wanted to use the same animations. Basically, that's what that is. These 4 values over here, they're control points. Okay, they're control points that allow you to basically control how this curve looks and how the animation is actually supposed to look. Okay, that's what that is. Then for the workspaces button itself. First of all, we make the color transparent because we're not actually interested in seeing the text of the workspace button itself. What we want to see is instead this beautiful gradient effect. Okay, we don't want to see the text because there's not much use for it, right? We want to see this. So we make the color transparent. And then for the background, we have a linear gradient, which is 180 degrees. That's gray 0. That's going to be this color, right? So custom Tokyo Night, gray 0 is going to be this color, 54567E. And that, if I show you in colorhexa.com, is that in? This is that color. This is what gray 0 looks like. So if I can also use Hyperpicker, get the same thing, like so. And it's the same color. Okay, we'll close out of this. We're using that color, and then we're putting BG1 as the color over here. So that's basically the gradient that you see for not the active button, but then for the rest of the buttons. If I got rid of this thing and then I just had gray 0, yeah, as you can see, there's already a comment that says was gray 0 before. If I remove this and then add in gray 0, it's just going to make it look a bit plainer. So background color, gray 0, makes it look much more plain. It has a bit of a more sophisticated look with this gradient, which is why we're going to keep it, right? Then for the transition, again, same thing. You want to apply the transition to every single element over here in terms of the buttons so that we can see really cool transitions. Great. Then, of course, we're setting the minimum width to be 0, then margin. Now, the way margin works, or the way any shorthand for whether it be margin or padding or any other place where you can input 4 values, is the values go like this, right? So you have top, right, bottom, left. So let's say I add in adding of 10 pixels, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 10 pixels. So top margin, or rather padding top is going to be 10 pixels. Padding right is going to be 2 pixels. Padding bottom, 2 pixels. Padding left, 10 pixels. Okay, that's what that actually is shorthand for. If you have only 2 values, on the other hand, it's going to be top, bottom for the first argument, not argument necessarily, but for the first value in this case, and right and left for the second value over here. So for the margin, okay, this is the workspace button itself, not for the active button. So between each of these buttons, we're going to have 5 pixels of spacing between the top and the bottom. So each of these modules is separated from each other by a distance of 5 pixels. That's what that does. I can increase this to 15 pixels, and this is the effect that you see, right? Much more spaced out. Keep that to 5 pixels. And of course, border radius. This changes the border radius of the border. So what it does is basically makes the border a bit more rounded. I can change this to 9999 pixels, as you see over here, turn this into a pill shape as well. But I like to keep this a little bit separated and squared off so that you actually see a transition between the main pill and the side ones. Now for the active workspace button, we're going to again add in a same linear gradient, 180 degrees. First, it's going to be blue at 0%, and then purple at 100%. So it starts off as blue and then ends as purple. Same effect can be seen no matter what theme I pick. Even if I pick Everforest, which this actually looks the best, right? Out of all of the different gradients, this one looks the cleanest. Right, this is what that looks like. Starts off as blue, ends as purple. Go back to Tokyo Night. This is what you see. Color, of course, transparent. You don't want to see any of the text. Same transition. Font size, you're increasing it to 13 pixels. You can honestly get rid of this because we're not going to be seeing any text there anyways. Okay, border radius, 9999 pixels. You can increase this to probably a smaller amount as well, probably something like 100 pixels or 200 pixels. Then have to give you the same effect, but just to make sure that you're not missing out on like 0.1 pixels of border radius rounding, you've just set it to 10,000 pixels. Then min height, this is going to dictate the minimum height of the module, of this active workspace module. So let's say I wanted it to be 10 pixels, it's 10 pixels. I wanted it to be 100. I wanted it to be even bigger. Well, that's what you got, 100 pixels. Okay. Min height in this case is going to dictate how tall this bad boy is. Then for hover. For hover, of course, we have background, which is linear gradient. It's going to be 180 degrees, purple at 0, and then blue at 100. So basically flipping it around. Yep, just flipping it the other way. And then same of the other properties. The background size is just going to be 400%. 400%, what this is doing is basically just taking like the background, like the gradient, and then applying it to everywhere, basically. Make sure that it's applied everywhere. Then same thing for the rest of the properties. For urgent as well, same transition, same background size, same everything. Just changing the color. Color doesn't matter actually. Just change this to transparent as well. Transparent. It should probably be glowing with a red and an orange. That's it. That's what an urgent workspace does. Okay. Then we don't actually have that much more to go because the rest of it is just color customizations. So let's just speed through this. Oh, and again, if you want to know how to make a setup like this, then you can just go ahead and click the first link in the description. As I've already showed you, I show you how to make this Overwatch panel. Okay. This thing, and then the Waybar configs, and then the custom theme switcher, and so much more in extreme precise detail in the first link in the description. So you can just go ahead and check that out. Okay. Now, for battery, network, and pulse audio, which are these 3 modules over here, I've just given them a background color. added a 0.5 opacity. So this one's actually being blurred through the blur. There's like double blur happening over here. Then margin of 10 pixels. So on each sides, this thing is being pressed from each side by 10 pixels. So you can think of margin and padding in this way, right? So if you have margin on any sort of module, what you're going to do effectively is basically press out. You can think of each of these modules as like getting hands and then pressing against the walls, which are the left border and the right border in this case. If I increase the margin, what happens is that the hands press harder against the walls, which causes this module to like shift even more. But padding works a little bit differently, right? Padding instead, what that does is causes the module to like blow up from the inside. So if I give this thing a background color of, let's say, red, okay, and then I can show you the effect properly. So this is what you see over here, right? Now what happens? First, I'll show you the increase in margin. So if I increase the margin, it's like it's being pressed down, okay? It's like the module is being pressed down from all sides. But if I increase the padding, what happens is that the module is being expanded from the inside. So I might have gotten the analogy mixed up a little. I might have been just explaining padding, but you know what I mean. Margin is as though you are pressing from the outside, and padding is as though you are pulling from the inside. So if I make this something like 20 pixels, yep, you're basically just going in there, just going into that module and ripping it out, like expanding it. Margin is basically you're just shrinking the damn thing. That's it. Okay, and this is what that's supposed to look like. Now, actually, if I give it another color, something like blue, doesn't look pretty bad, does it? It actually looks pretty good. So we can just keep this if you want to, or we can just revert this back to PG, something like true. And that gives us this. Awesome. Next up, we have the pulse audio slider, which is this slider that you see. So it's not going to have any padding whatsoever. Margin, top, bottom is going to be 15 pixels. Left, right, this thing is already centered in its place, so we don't want to do anything to that. Okay? Then for the slider, like this, the slider portion, we can actually go to the wiki and then see what it says about that. Pulse audio / slider. That should be here. Scroll down, and here, slider controls the style of the slider handle. That's going to be this handle over here, this clickable and draggable thing. You can change the border radius of this. You can add in a different background color. You can add in a minimum height, so you can increase the height of this puck that you can drag around. And then you have the slider's trough, which is going to be this. The trough is basically the thing in which this slider is actually set inside. Okay. Then you have the highlight, which is how much of the trough has been already covered by this puck looking thing. And that's that. You can customize it however you want. It's given in the wiki over here. Slider controls the style of the slider handle. Trough controls the style of the part of the bar that has not been filled. That's going to be this thing. And the highlight controls the style of the part of the bar that has been filled. So this green thing, yep, that is going to be your highlight. And then of course the slider itself controls the style of the box around the slider and the bar. So in case you wanted to give it a background, really fancy it up a little, you can use that. Then for the MISC modules, as I showed you earlier, for these modules, all I've done is just increase the font size so it can be clicked on a little easier. Then for custom launcher, this doesn't apply anymore. For custom separator, margin top is going to be 5 pixels, and then the font size is going to be 20 pixels, so that, again, I can actually hover over the thing, and it doesn't look too small. For the clock, color is going to be blue, signature blue, across everywhere, from this panel to this logout menu, to every other place. Blue is a good color, right? We're using that over here as well. Font family. Now, this font family is one called PP New Machina. PP New Machina is the font which I'm using over here. You can replace it for any other font, but in my experience, like this font for this clock is pretty much perfect, because let's show you what happens if I use a font like space grotesque. Okay, I write the changes. This is what happens. You see, the letter spacing is fine and all, but the line height, you're going to have to perform markup magic, okay, over here. So you're probably going to have to use Pango in order to add in different line heights from span tags and whatnot. It's a whole bunch of mess. So instead of having to deal with that, I just replace the font itself for a more viable font that looks even cleaner and 10 times better, which is PP New Machina. Increase the font weight, which gives us this result for the clock. Pretty goddamn nice, right? Then for the font size, of course, bump that up to 28 pixels so we can see something. For the margin, we have 15 pixels on the top and on the top, okay, top right, right? And then for the right side, we have 5 pixels. For the bottom, we have 0 because this thing has margin top. And for the left side, we have 5 pixels. And then basically for the rest of the modules, all we're doing is just adding a little bit of margin and then changing the color so that we get this beautiful masterpiece over here. For the battery, we've just increased the margin bottom, and that is pretty much it. That's all you need. All you really need is a config.jsonc and a style.css in order to be able to make a freaking downright stunning, gorgeous Waybar config like this one. If you want to know how to make a blazing fast and beautiful Hyprland setup like this one that I just showed you, along with this Waybar config, more Waybar configs like this one, creating them from scratch, I show you my exact thought process behind creating stuff like this, how my brain's actually able to come up with any of this. And honestly, if I had to summarize like the program, that's the first link in the description, in like one sentence, it would be download my brain that has over 3 years of Linux writing experience and Hyprland writing experience in, you know, really less time, basically. You get to download my brain, you get to download 3 years of knowledge in however long the program is, however long it takes you to finish it. Okay, and it's going to be, I can guarantee you, a hell of a lot less than 3 years. Of course, along with that, I teach you how to make app launchers like this one, lock screens like this one, all on your own, okay? Logout menus like this one, notifications like this. Ta-da! Okay, it's pretty nice, right? Along with Overwatch menus like this one, animations like this, and basically everything that you could possibly need. So go ahead and click the first link in the description. If you liked the video, hit like. If you loved it and want to see more like this in your feed, hit subscribe, and I will see you next time. Stay rising.